Welcome to the Fivefold Understanding YouTube channel. The most censoredest single place for shadow banned videos. If that's your thing, you can find them right here. Fivefold Understanding YouTube, where the light in the attic is always on. I've been away for a while, but I'm back. Back to do what we sometimes do occasionally around here. We read and review comic books together simultaneously, and we do this to get you, the viewer, into the comic book shop. You come here, you find a good place to start, and then we send you off on your way. And I thought, damn, I got to do something a little different, something a little more classy. And who better than Wally Wood, the illustrative world's starman himself, who didn't actually like being called Wally Wood, Wallace Wood. And since he's part of the dearly departed, he was born in 72, I want to say. Or excuse me, he was born in 27. I got that backwards. And he committed suicide in 81 or 82, I believe it was. Or maybe it was 84. I think he was like 53. Whether he was suicided or suicide, right? Regardless, so we're here to celebrate him and show off some of his comics. Why is this guy an icon? And from this point moving forward, we'll refer to him as Woody. And my bad, too. He was born in 27, died in 81. It's been a long time since I got on here, talked to myself, and recorded it. So we'll just move forward. And today's climate, suicide has a different frame, I guess, with it, because you hear so many weird stories about suicides and being suicided. A very different thing today than I'm sure it was to most back then. But like I said, we're here to celebrate the man. Look at his beautiful works. This guy was an icon, and I don't even know where to start. I can tell you he was born in Minnesota, like many, many other great artists. The legendary Kurt Swan, and more contemporary gentlemen like Patrick Gleason, Superman Rebirth, Green Lantern Corps. That's pre-Blackest Night, through Blackest Night. I think he even did New 52, Doug Mockney, Dan Jurgens, the guy that killed Superman. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Mr. Booster Gold himself. But like I said, today's subject, Wally Wood. And let's do some science fiction comics. I figured to switch it up a little bit. Now, over here on the far right is kind of where he made his name at EC Comics. Legendary EC Comics, Tales from the Crypt, and the Crypt Keeper, and all the... I can't think of what they're called. There's a whole trinity of them. Horror hosts who became very, very popular long after the Golden Age, and they're in this documentary here I did. If you want to learn more about EC Comics and horror comics, check out that documentary. It covers all the ground, all the hosts, as I'm your host for today. I need to make sure I cover the groundwork, and there is so much of it, believe me. This is some of the stuff he's more famous for, especially the shock suspense stories cover over here on the right of the Ku Klux Klan. It's just, you know, it's such a powerful image. It's just, it really, really resonates, as does all of his work. This guy was, like I said, he was an absolute icon, legendary madman pencil illustrator and inker, who I would argue is most famous for his science fiction. Stuff like Weird Science Fantasy and the books before that and after it. Because the strange thing here with EC Comics, just prior to them going out of business in the early 50s, mid-50s, they combined a lot of their comic books like Weird Science here and Weird Fantasy, both after issue 22, were compounded or synthesized into Weird Science Fantasy. And although it does read on the cover issue number 1, it can also be looked at as number 23. It had something to do with paying postage stamps to relaunch a series back then. I didn't look too much into the details, but those 2 books, like I said, were synthesized into weird science fantasy. And this is where Wally Wood's science fiction career really started to take off. And the funny thing here is with this book, after 22 issues, like I said, it merged into what we're looking at now with issue 23. And this series itself went 7 issues up through 29 before the summer of 55, when the title changed once again into Incredible Science Fiction Comics. And this was the last issue of EC Comics. And of course, it has that uber popular Wally Wood penned and illustrated cover that I used for the thumbnail you probably seen when you clicked on the video. Very legendary comic book right here. Comic book cover, and thus why the cover reads number 11, because Weird Science Fantasy 23 through 29 was the 1 through 7, and then the final 4 issues became that one we just looked at. It's very confusing after a while, but nevertheless, all that stuff was anchored by the master, good old Woody, who is known for actually more than just science fiction books, which we'll get into here. But he also did a lot of work on Daredevil. When they first, I almost wanted to say relaunched Daredevil, a pirated character that Stan Lee pirated following the collapse of Lev Gleason publications in the mid-50s. Once the patent, or the, I don't know what they actually call it, runs out on a character, it can be reclaimed and redeveloped. And that's where Marvel's Daredevil comes from. And once you start really studying comics, you notice this becomes a reoccurring theme with Marvel comics and Stan Lee especially. Like the Fantastic Four, the Challengers of the Unknown were an early version, a DC Comics version of 100% what Stan Lee used to create his greatest comic books, magazine, legendary characters, the flagship of the Marvel industry. Anyhow, we're not here to talk about Stan Lee. We're here to talk about Woody. And these were a few of his, all of which you're looking at here, were penciled, inked, up and down by Woody himself. I want to say he did Daredevil issues 6 through 11. I believe he did the inks on 11. And he also did the cover, I want to say, for issue number 5. So when Daredevil first meets Submariner, that's all Woody. Mr. Fear over here on the left, this crazy bright cover. Beautiful Silver Age stuff. Another noteworthy point for Woody and Daredevil was some of his creations that he gave to the mythology that for some reason chicken shits like Netflix don't want to touch. They want to reuse the same characters over and over again and not expand the mythology. Nevertheless, that's topic for another video. But he created the Stilt Man. I mean, is that not awesome or what? Look at that guy. It's over here on the left side of the screen. He did the cover down there for 5. I think he inked and illustrated that, along with his good friend, House of Mystery extraordinaire, Gangster Joe Orlando. They were, along with Jack Kirby and Vincent Collada, I want to say, were, or maybe I got that wrong. Vince Colletta. I meant to say Vince Colletta. Along with Woody, Joe Orlando, Jack Kirby, Bob Powell, and Bill Everett. That illustrative team right there is the true secret origin of Daredevil and all the awesomeness that came out of Daredevil in the 60s. Arguably Marvel's best Silver Age comic, outside of Fantastic Four, but like you heard prior to, I have my arguments. Seeing that so much of it was pirated. Anyhow, Woody was a big, big part of Daredevil. Like we checked out over here, the Stilt Man on your right side of your screen. Is there a more memorable Daredevil cover, period, outside of maybe number 1 than issue number 9 right there, August of 64, 65? Look at that. Hans Kruger's Killer Castle. And what a great idea for a Netflix episode. They're not that smart. But Woody sure was. Creating characters, like I said, the Stilt Man. Check this guy out. Is this guy not awesome or what? He's got Silver Age supervillain written all over him. Schematic drawing over here to your left. That might even have been by Woody himself. I know the far left side of the screen is more modern, but just about everything else outside of an image or two in the upper right-hand corner that I didn't take from Woody's illustrative archive. Sure is some beautiful, beautiful work. As was his Mad Magazine illustrations he did. G.I. Joe Schmo. A huge, huge part in Mad history. Woody set the bar pretty damn high for all other Mad artists who came after him. And this, I guess, is a legendary Mad issue from 1952. Or rather, issue 10 from 1954 as the Korean War wrapped up and EC Comics had just went out of business. Woody came over here to Mad Magazine and hit him up with G.I. Joe Schmo. In the piece, Woody depicts lusty American soldiers coming home and chasing after all the women. And I almost forgot, Woody's accolades are so extensive that he also introduced the world to Daredevil's red suit. I mean, I almost forgot that, and that's a pretty, pretty big deal, seeing as he goes from this to that, which is a much, much more apropos, as he also introduced the comic book world to the illustrative Daredevil radar senses and the circles that come from his head, which is a hallmark Daredevil illustrative trademark still till this day. And he did that in either issues 5 or 6. Or perhaps it was even issue 8 when it first appears on the cover in the upper left-hand corner, in the same issue where he introduced us to the fabled Stilt Man. Because as you see it up there in issue 8 in the left corner, it's not there in issue 7. That doesn't mean it didn't happen at some point after issue 5 or 6. I'm not 100% positive. Nevertheless, it's just one more thank you the comic book world owes Woody. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that Disney was saying anything but thank you. In some point in the early 1980s, he put out his own magazine, sort of a Mad offshoot called Wit's End, where it featured this image, the Disney porno poster picture, allegedly the most pirated image of the 1980s. And it's quite a wonder to behold, because as most comic book creators were creating new characters, Woody was just having fun. was quite a fondly remembered image, poster, picture, satirical art that came out shortly before his death. He was a master, to say the very least. Whether it was panels in science fiction instrumentation, or just woman, the human body, people in action, or space itself. He was very good with the visual points and the disappearing perspective, which you can see some of here on the panel on your left. And it's defined here also. His career was an adventure full of accolades and accomplishments. And now I think it's time for us to read a couple. And although the story we're about to read gets commonly linked in with this image here, or that later cover, the last cover of EC Comics Science Fiction line, the story we're about to read was featured here in Weird Science Fantasy issue 28, which is technically Weird Science Fantasy number 6. The Inferiors. And since I'm just your host, we'll go through it slowly. You can read it for yourself. And a famous thing Wood is known for is he always put his signature, a Wood or a Woody. He signed the first panel on the first page of the story. One of his many trademarks. Quite a lot of words in these, huh? And most of the EC Comics stories are usually under 10 pages. It's sort of an anthology-like format, whether it's the horror, the science fiction, or the romance. Usually 3 different artists, a rotating cast per issue. typical elite, superiority, narcissistic asshole. I'll decide whether or not the crew should hear it after I listen to it. These privileged, hubris, out of control assholes. And they're still around today. Crazy ending, huh? Like Twilight Zone shit. And you can see Woods got some crazy critters here, man. And you can see all the instrumentation and the paneling he always does in the background is just bar none. He really set the bar high. The Atom Age. Sort of a proto-Silver Age during the space race. This image right here is the one that's crazy if you look into this creature's eyes. Spooky, huh? And I suppose if you stuck around with me this long, we can do another one. This one we'll do Incredible Science Fiction, issue number 30. And this was after Weird Science Fantasy switched its title, so this is the first time after it switched its title again, you could say. This here is a modern, I thought this was kind of cool, Back to the Future homage to these covers. This one, the famous one by Wood, anyhow. And this cover, although not by Wood, by Jack Daniels, or excuse me, Jack Davis, who was pretty good at the Atom Age science fiction art himself, as you can see here. Now, this comic has a few different stories in it. One is called Barrier, and that's the cover story by Jack Davis. Condition Reflex by Gangster Joe Orlando, Mr. House of Mystery format himself. Marbles by Knightson. And Clean Start by Woody. You can always tell there's his name right there in the opening part of the story, usually in the first panel or the biggest panel. There's some weird looking creatures here. And it's like, these guys are the Foo Fighters, you know, reported during World War II and stuff. They should have had a little, maybe they'll have a little shout out to that or something. Because they're time travelers, man, like those UFOs, you know, alien flying saucers. Those things don't fly, they jump. Sure, they could hover and float around, but it ain't like they fly from another planet, I don't think, unless they live on the moon or something. They jump. And that's probably what they say, too. We must forget disgust and pity and look upon man only as a problem. So they go all the way back in time looking for like the origin of murder. And see, you can tell Woody here has the same problem that Will Eisner had, where the colors cannot keep up with the detail of the art because the coloring wasn't sharp enough back then. It bled too much and it was like, it was almost too matted. The best way to go look at some Will Eisner spirit work is to get the black and whites from Kitchen Sink that came out in, I don't know, the late 80s or something. And you can really see how well of an illustrator he was. I'd love to just do all wood and black and white. That'd probably be the best way to read and look at his stuff. And I think here on the right, supposed to be, French Revolution. I'll have my cake and eat it too. And that French Revolution's going on right now again, part two, the yellow vests. It's an interesting thing to keep your eye on because the news is not reporting on that because they don't want that happening here. And then they lie about the cause of it. It's because people are being suppressed. There's too much financial suppression. And that's the same here as it is over there. Just the French are more proud, apparently, more united. So going all the way back to Cain and Abel, I'm guessing. When they come back, they're going to abduct somebody. Watch. Yep. Wow, crazy, huh? I guess that's that. But so there's plenty of other Wally Wood anthologies and whatnot you can go out there and buy. This one right here features who knows what. I guess I really didn't look into it. I just picked up some old comics and tried to get them into the best resolution I could. But yeah, Wally Wood was an ultimate master. Ultimate master. And I appreciate it if you, hung out with me this long. At least you know where to find more of his stuff. Because the guy truly was a master. You see the black and white, how much better it looks? It's like the colors almost wreck, the illustrative qualities of it. Yeah, it's too bad he left the world too soon. And who could ever forget a cover like this? Just awesome, The Silver Age will always be remembered for people like Wallace Wood, one of the pillars of the comic book industry. I mean, just think. Daredevil could still look like this today if it wasn't for good old Wally Wood. Wallace Wood, because he doesn't like being called Wally. And with that being said, thanks for coming by, guys. Throw me a subscribe if you would like to. We'll do more fun stuff like this next time. The saga continues.